Hi, everyone. In this talk, I will be focusing on experimental book publishing. I will be drawing predominantly on research being conducted within the COPIM, Community-Led Open Publication Infrastructures for Monographs project, in which we have a work package that is dedicated to experimental book publishing and reuse. The research I'm presenting here today is based on inherently collaborative work conducted together with my colleagues Rebecca Kiesewetter, Julia McHardy, Gary Hall, Samuel Moore, Tobias Steiner, Marcel Mars, and Simon Bowie. Our research looks at experiments with the book that reimagine the relationalities that constitute academic writing, research, and publishing, and that speculate on what the future of the book and the humanities could look like beyond the printed codex format as the standard publication choice. With respect to experimental publishing, it is important to emphasize how the ecology or infrastructure around books in a digital environment has increasingly become embedded in our cultures of reading, writing, and publishing. At the same time, this infrastructure is increasingly populated by closed and commercial software and platforms and controlled by specific stakeholders within scholarly communication, for example, universities, publishers, and libraries. This situation can become problematic when researchers want to experiment with the forms, formats, concept, materiality, temporality, situatedness, and relationalities of their publications. For example, when they want to challenge the linearity of this infrastructure and its focus on standardized book objects authored by individual humanist authors, instead of more experimental, open-ended, multimodal, and collaborative research and publishing projects and processes. More recently, various projects have started to map open source publishing solutions, which we argue are much more suitable for more experimental forms of publishing. As Massimo Rivo argues in this respect, the transformation of the academic book of the future is inseparable from the transformation of our research infrastructure as a whole, including particular current and emerging forms or genres of scholarly communication. We see the importance of this when universities, for example, only offer specific tools, equipment, or online environments, such as the Microsoft Office 365 suite, for their researchers to use in their research. When publishers use static workflows that incorporate specific, again, often commercial tools and services. And when libraries are only able to store, preserve, and make available in their systems specific book objects that fit to their rules and topographies of what qualifies as a book. But most problematic perhaps in this context are the closed access ownership and copyright systems that underlie these infrastructures, which have been detrimental for and severely restrict further reuse, engagement, sharing, remix, interaction, and uptake of research. This explains the difficulty experimental formats of publications have in entering these environments, even beyond the difficulty open access books already have. And it also explains why many of the most interesting experiments with experimental books or publications have happened outside of these realms, either set up by researchers or groups of researchers themselves, see for example the journals Factors and Kairos, or by technology providers developing software and platforms to support these experiments outside of established infrastructures and workflows. Publishers have been experimenting with this too, but it has mainly been smaller and not-for-profit presses, such as Media Commons Press, Open Humanities Press, and Electric Press, that have taken the lead in this, whereas larger and commercial publishers have often taken a wait-and-see approach, partly because their infrastructure are not flexible enough to adapt, and partly because they do not want to adapt and give up their corporate control of the distribution and consumption of academic books. What COPIM wants to do is start making it easier for authors and publishers to take up these kinds of experiments, to integrate them into their workflows. We are doing so by highlighting the open source tools, technologies, platforms, and software that are already available to support experimental forms of publishing, whether they are custom designed for academic books or not. But instead of presenting this as some sort of techno-solutionist answer to the problems sketched out earlier, where simply building and pointing out solutions will overcome your hesitations, we are keen to explore in more depth what the inhibitions and the barriers towards uptake of these kinds of experimental works and processes are, both for authors and for presses. As such, we are working closely with author communities and with presses to create pilot projects and communities of best practice, to explore how to best do experimental publishing with them and learn from the process along the way. We have published two main research reports, which serve as a resource for the scholarly community, especially for authors and publishers interested in pursuing more experimental forms of book publishing. The first report, Books Contain Multitudes, Exploring Experimental Publishing, seeks to map some of the different kinds of experiments that are currently taking place within the realm of scholarly book publishing that challenge the dominance of print-based processes within academic publishing as being natural and the most suitable for all forms of research. These include experiments with the form and format of the scholarly book, with the various multimedia through which books can be performed, with the ways in which scholarship can be produced, disseminated, and consumed, as well as reviewed, reused, and interacted with, and experiments that want to rethink what research, scholarly communication, and publishing are or do, and how they are currently organized. The second part of the report provides a typology of different types and forms of scholarly books, based on various experiments currently being conducted within academia, accompanied by a selection of examples to illustrate each of the different types identified. The focus in this report is on experimental books created with open source software, tools, or platforms, an overview of which is provided in section 3 of this report. These are digital publishing tools that press and authors can either freely use and or further adapt themselves within their workflows. Beyond providing an overview of alternative publishing options, perhaps most importantly, this report wants to map and build communities around books. Emphasizing the political and socio-technical nature of our publishing tools and infrastructures, we hope this report will help establish relationships between software and tool providers, publishers, and authors, and create communities of expertise around experimental books. The second report, Promoting and Nurturing Interactions with Open Access Books, Strategies for Publishers and Authors, is a 3-part research and scoping report which has been created as an evolving resource for the scholarly community, especially for publishers and authors interested in fostering more engagement with open access books. Many of the types of interaction and interactive practices we explore within this report, such as open annotation, open peer review, versioning, and data mining, have seen wider adoption within the STEM fields, where their uptake is also more widely researched. The arts, humanities, and social sciences in general have lower adoption rates where it concerns these types of practices and also have field-specific preferences as well as prejudices. These preferences and prejudices are further discussed in this report, as are strategies and guidelines for publishers and authors to further promote, nurture, and facilitate interaction with openly available books within these fields. So the first part of this report provides a literature overview to identify the opportunities that digital technologies and enhanced interactions with open access books can provide for scholarship. It outlines some of the main types of interactions around open books that scholars are involved in, and it showcases some of the experiments within humanities book publishing with reuse, remix, and more interactive features. Finally, it presents some of the main technological and social-cultural inhibitions that have prevented further uptake of these practices. The second part more closely explores the technical dependencies that the introduced interactions and affordances rely upon. Doing so, it outlines and showcases a variety of open source tools, software, technologies, platforms, infrastructures, guidelines, and best practices that lend themselves to being adopted by publishers and authors, or by publishers and authors working in collaboration with each other to facilitate interaction around their books. The third part provides recommendations, guidelines, and strategies, again, both sociocultural and technological, for publishers and authors to further open up their books and collections to community interaction and reuse. We at COPEN want to promote the publication of experimental books and immersion genres of scholarship, while examining those technologies and cultural strategies that are most effective in encouraging the interaction with and reuse of open access book content. However, rather than building our own tools for experimental publishing, our work is focused on examining ways to more closely align existing software, technologies, workflows, and infrastructures for experimental publishing with the workflow of open access book publishers and with the infrastructures that COPEN is creating. As part of this, we are creating a set of pilot projects of experimental books, including by scholar-led presses Open Humanities Press, Open Book Publishers, and Mattering Press, which will try out some of those existing tools and technologies, a process which we will document along the way. One of COPEN's pilot projects is run by Open Humanities Press in collaboration with a group of scholars, technologists, and students from Mexico, led by Dr. Gabriela Mendez Cota. The pilot, titled Combinatorial Books, Gathering Flowers, explores and encourages the revisiting and rewriting of books within the open access Open Humanities Press catalog as a means of generating radical new responses to them. To enable this, the project team is experimenting with new workflows, which will be documented and made available for others working in this space. In a second pilot project, Mattering Press is collaborating with the Politics of Patent Research project, which, led by Kat Jung-Nicol, explores connections between citizens and clothing, drawing on over 200 years of patent data. For the pilot project, they're experimenting with what a data book would look like, probing how texts relate to the archive and how the book mediates between archive and interpretation, exploring where the archive ends and the book starts. A third pilot project, X Sketchbook, in collaboration with TIB Hanover, the Bartlett School of Architecture, and Open Book Publishers, will explore the state of the art of experimentation in architectural publishing and in the creation of computational books, which are books that include or incorporate code as part of their critical content, or that execute or run code as part of their knowledge production or publication process. Next to these pilot projects, we're also developing an online toolkit that will display and establish connections between open source tools to support experimental book publishing, examples of experimental books, and practices and guidelines to support the creation of these books. We hope to have a prototype of this toolkit ready by the end of 2022. For more information, please be in touch. Thank you very much.